The Trial of Species. The Great Hall of Omega-7 Station stretched before Captain Sarah Chen like a cathedral of judgment. Thousands of alien beings filled the curved amphitheater, their various forms creating a tapestry of evolution that should have been beautiful. Instead, Sarah felt the weight of their collective hostility pressing down on her shoulders like a physical force. Sarah stood alone in the defendant's circle, her navy blue Earth Fleet uniform crisp and spotless, despite the 3-month journey to reach this place. At 42, she had commanded exploration vessels for 15 years, had made first contact with 6 different species, and had never once fired a weapon in anger. Yet here she stood, representing all of humanity before a tribunal that had already decided their fate. High Judge Zarian rose from the central platform, its crystalline body catching and refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns across the walls. The ancient being had presided over galactic law for 3 centuries, and its voice resonated through both sound and telepathic transmission, reaching every mind present. The Tribunal of Species convenes to address the charges against the human race, Zarian announced. These proceedings will determine whether humanity deserves continued membership in the galactic community, or if they pose too great a threat to civilized space. Ambassador Krath stepped forward from the prosecutor's section, its 6 insectoid legs clicking against the polished floor. The Zephyrian's compound eyes fixed on Sarah with unmistakable hatred. Krath had been pushing for human expulsion for years, claiming that Earth's children were too aggressive, too unpredictable for galactic society. Honored Judge, Krath began, its voice buzzing with barely contained anger. The evidence against the human species is overwhelming. They expand beyond approved limits, militarize faster than any species in recorded history, and solve every problem with violence first, diplomacy second. The prosecutor activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. Images flashed before the assembled delegates. Human colonies on worlds marked as disputed territory, Earth fleet vessels with weapon arrays that exceeded civilian specifications, and recordings of human soldiers in combat situations. Observe their latest transgression, Krath continued, the Kepler 442 incident. When hegemony forces moved to reclaim their ancestral territory, humans responded not with negotiation or legal appeals, but with immediate military action. 47 hegemony vessels destroyed, over 3,000 dead. Sarah's jaw tightened as she watched the footage. The prosecutor conveniently omitted the fact that hegemony forces had attacked civilian shipping and were preparing to bombard a colony with 2 million inhabitants. But the tribunal rules prohibited her from speaking until the prosecution had finished its case. This pattern repeats across human space, Krath pressed on. 17 separate incidents of unauthorized military action, 23 violations of expansion treaties, 41 cases of technology proliferation without proper oversight. They are a virus in the galactic body, spreading chaos wherever they establish themselves. The insectoid's display showed graphs and statistics, each one carefully chosen to paint humanity in the worst possible light. Settlement growth rates that looked aggressive when stripped of context. Military spending figures that ignored the pirate threats human colonies faced. Trade disputes presented as territorial conquests. Most damning of all, Krath said, its voice rising to a clicking crescendo, is their fundamental nature. Humans evolved as apex predators on a death world. Violence is encoded in their very DNA. They cannot be reformed, cannot be civilized, cannot be trusted to coexist peacefully with species that evolved to value cooperation over conquest. The prosecutor yielded the floor, and Judge Zarian's crystalline form pulsed with soft light. Captain Chen, you may now present humanity's defense. Sarah stepped forward, her boots echoing in the suddenly silent chamber. She had prepared for this moment for months, had memorized every fact and figure that might save her species. But as she looked around at the thousands of alien faces watching her, she realized that facts would not be enough. Fear had already won this trial before it began. Honored Judge, respected delegates, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. You have heard my people described as monsters, as a plague upon civilized space. I ask you to consider a different perspective. She activated her own holographic display, showing scenes of human colonies, children playing in parks under alien suns, scientists working alongside researchers from dozens of species, human doctors, treating patients regardless of their origin. Yes, humans fight when threatened. We learned that lesson on Earth where everything from the weather to the wildlife tried to kill us. But we also learned to build, to explore, to reach out to strangers, and make them friends. The display shifted to show human rescue ships pulling, survivors from natural disasters, human engineers building infrastructure on undeveloped worlds, human mediators resolving conflicts between alien species. The Kepler 442 incident that Ambassador Krath mentioned, human ships responded to a distress call from civilian transports under attack. We saved 130,000 lives that day. Yes, we destroyed hegemony warships, but only after they refused our attempts at negotiation and continued firing on helpless refugees. Sarah could see some delegates shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The prosecutor's version had omitted these crucial details. Ambassador Krath calls us violent, but where was the Galactic Council when the Ravager swarms threatened the outer colonies? Human volunteers held the line for 6 months while the Council debated proper procedures. Where was galactic law when the Syndicate pirates raided shipping lanes? Human patrol fleets kept the trade routes open, while official peacekeepers filed reports and formed committees. The captain's voice grew stronger as she continued. You fear our military capabilities, but those same capabilities have been placed at the service of galactic peace time and again. You worry about our expansion, but every human world has welcomed refugee populations that other species abandoned. You question our technology sharing, but human innovations have increased agricultural yields on 40 different worlds. Sarah paused, looking directly at Judge Zerion. The prosecutor claims that violence is in our DNA. This is true, but so is compassion, so is curiosity, so is the drive to explore, to learn, to grow. Yes, we will fight to protect what we hold dear, but we will also sacrifice everything to save strangers we have never met. The display now showed human soldiers sharing their rations with alien civilians, human doctors working 18-hour shifts during plague outbreaks, human engineers redirecting their own supply ships to help struggling colonies. We are not perfect, Sarah admitted. No species is. We make mistakes. We act too quickly sometimes. We fail to understand cultural nuances that seem obvious to others. But we learn from our errors, and we always try to do better. Judge Zerion's form pulsed thoughtfully. The tribunal appreciates your passionate defense, Captain Chen. However, the charges against humanity remain serious. The question is not whether humans can perform noble deeds, but whether they can be trusted to consistently choose cooperation over conquest. Sarah felt the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. This was her last chance, her final opportunity to save humanity's place in galactic civilization. Honored Judge, she said quietly, I cannot promise that humans will never make mistakes. I cannot guarantee that we will always choose the path that others consider wise. But I can promise this: humanity will always stand with those who cannot stand for themselves. We will always fight for the innocent, regardless of species or politics. And we will never ever abandon our friends when they need us most. The captain's eyes swept across the assembled delegates. The question is not whether you can trust us to be perfect. The question is whether you can afford to cast out the one species that will fight for the galaxy's future when everyone else has given up hope. For a long moment the chamber was silent except for the hum of life support systems. Then Judge Zerion began to glow more brightly, and Sarah knew that the decision had been made long before she ever spoke. The Tribunal of Species has considered all evidence and arguments, Zerion announced. By a vote of 743 to 112, we find the human species guilty of excessive territorial expansion, unauthorized military action, and fundamental incompatibility with galactic civilization. Sarah felt the words hit her like physical blows. Around the chamber she could hear sounds of approval from many of the delegates. Therefore, Zerion continued, all human presence is hereby expelled from the inner and middle rim territories. You have 60 standard days to remove all human settlements, installations, and vessels from civilized space. Any human found within Council jurisdiction after this deadline will be treated as an enemy combatant. The crystalline judge's form pulsed once more. Furthermore, all human activities are restricted to the Outer Rim territories. This exile is permanent and absolute. Sarah stood in stunned silence as the implications sank in. 60 days to abandon everything humanity had built over a century of spacefaring civilization. 60 days to pack up 12 billion lives and retreat to the galaxy's most dangerous frontier. Captain Chen, Judge Zirion said, its voice carrying what might have been regret. You have spoken eloquently of humanity's virtues. Perhaps in the harsh crucible of the Outer Rim, your species will learn the wisdom that has eluded them in civilized space. As the tribunal began to disperse, Sarah stood alone in the defendant's circle, watching her species' future crumble around her. The aliens thought they were solving a problem by banishing humanity to the galactic frontier. They had no idea that they had just given Earth's children exactly what they needed to become something far more dangerous than anything the galaxy had ever seen. The exile would begin in 60 days, but Sarah suspected that this was not an ending at all. It was the beginning of something that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization itself. Exile and Adaptation Admiral Marcus Kane stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the largest migration in human history unfold before him. Through the massive viewport, he could see thousands of ships stretching to the horizon like a river of metal and light against the star-scattered darkness of space. Colony ships, cargo haulers, military escorts, and civilian transports all moved together toward the edge of civilized space and the unknown dangers of the Outer Rim. Marcus was 57 years old with gray hair and laugh lines around his eyes that had deepened into worry creases during the past 2 months. He had commanded battle fleets before, but never anything like this. This was not a military operation or an exploration mission. This was the evacuation of an entire civilization, and the weight of 12 billion lives pressed down on his shoulders, like a physical burden. Admiral, the last convoy from Sector 7 is reporting ready for jump, announced Commander Lisa Park from her station. Lisa was young, maybe 30, with the kind of steady competence that made her invaluable during a crisis. She had volunteered for this mission knowing that she might never see Earth again. Signal all fleet elements, Marcus replied. Begin final approach to the Rim Gate. The Rim Gate was humanity's last connection to civilized space, a massive artificial construct that regulated travel between the Middle Rim and the lawless outer territories. Beyond that gate lay a frontier that had claimed thousands of ships over the centuries, a realm of pirates, ancient weapons, and things that Council scientists had never classified. Dr. Elena Vasquez moved between the refugee processing stations on the civilian transport horizon's edge, her medical scanner constantly active as she checked the health status of families who had lost everything except each other. Elena was a small woman with graying brown hair and gentle hands that never stopped moving. She had been the chief colonial, planning officer for the Centauri sector before the exile, responsible for designing settlements that could thrive in alien environments. Doctor, the Morrison family in Section C is asking about their son, said medical technician James Wright. James was barely out of training, but he had thrown himself into the evacuation effort with the determination that Elena recognized in all the younger volunteers. Their boy is in the pediatric ward on the sanctuary, Elena replied without checking her notes. She had memorized the location of every separated family member among the 3 million refugees on her ship. His broken leg is healing well, and he should be ready for transfer once we establish our first colony. Elena did not mention that they had no idea where that first colony would be, or whether they would survive long enough to build it. The Outer Rim was not called the frontier of lost ships without reason. Chief Engineer Tom Bradley was having similar thoughts as he worked in the massive cargo holds of the Industrial Transport Heavy Lifter. Tom was a big man with scarred hands, and a practical mind that saw problems as puzzles to be solved rather than obstacles to overcome. His job was to make sure that humanity had the tools necessary to build a new civilization from scratch. The fabrication units are secured in Hold 7, reported his assistant, Engineer Kate Sullivan. Kate was brilliant with machinery, the EQ, Kind of person who could make broken equipment work with spare parts and determination. But we're short on rare Earth elements for the advanced electronics. Then we make do with what we have, Tom replied, checking his inventory lists. Humans built their first cities with stone and wood. If we have to start over with basic technology, we will. Tom did not mention that basic technology would not protect them from the threats that lurked in the Outer Rim. Pirates with advanced weapons, automated defense systems left by dead civilizations, and entities that existed in the spaces between stars. But Tom had learned long ago that worrying about tomorrow's problems was less useful than solving today's challenges. The convoy's passage through the Rim Gate was both anticlimactic and terrifying. One moment they were still technically part of galactic civilization, protected by laws and treaties that had governed space for thousands of years. The next moment, they were in the Outer Rim, where the only law was survival, and the only protection was what they brought with themselves. All ships maintain formation, Marcus broadcast to the fleet. Begin deep space scans for suitable systems. The search took 18 days. 18 days of traveling through space that grew darker and stranger the farther they went from civilized territory. They passed the wreckage of ships that had tried to explore these regions centuries earlier, some destroyed by weapons, others by forces that their sensors could not identify. Finally, their scouts found what they were looking for, a system with a habitable world, abundant mineral resources, and no obvious signs of current habitation. The planet was not beautiful by Earth standards, with red soil and gray mountains under a pale orange sky, but it had breathable air, liquid water, and enough space for millions of colonists. "Welcome to Haven," Elena announced as the first shuttles descended toward the planet's surface. The name had been chosen by popular vote among the refugees, reflecting their desperate hope for a safe place to rebuild their lives. The early days on Haven tested every skill that humanity had developed. During a century of space colonization, the soil was poor and would need extensive treatment before it could support Earth crops. The weather patterns were violent and unpredictable. Most challenging of all, the planet's unusual magnetic field interfered with advanced electronics, forcing the colonists to rely on hardened equipment and backup systems. But humans had learned to adapt on 100 different worlds. Teams of engineers worked around the clock to establish power grids and communication networks. Agricultural specialists developed new farming techniques that could work with Haven's challenging soil. Construction crews built shelters that could withstand the planet's fierce storms. Tom Bradley found himself coordinating the construction of Haven City, the colony's first major settlement. The city was designed to be expandable and defensible, with underground sections that could shelter the population during the worst weather. Every building was constructed with locally available materials, making the human settlement look almost organic as it grew across the landscape. "The fusion reactors are online," Kate reported as she emerged from the newly completed power plant. "We have enough energy to support a population of 500,000. "Good," Tom replied, wiping sweat from his forehead, "because the latest convoy just arrived with another 200,000 colonists. The real test came 3 months after the colony's establishment, when long-range sensors detected a fleet of unknown ships approaching the Haven system. The vessels were sleek and predatory, clearly designed for combat rather than exploration or trade. Admiral Kane received the alert while reviewing defensive preparations aboard the orbital station that served as the colony's military headquarters. The station was hastily constructed but heavily armed, mounting weapons that had been salvaged from decommissioned Earth fleet vessels. "Admiral, we count 47 ships in the approaching fleet," reported Captain Sarah Chen, who had requested transfer to Haven after the tribunal proceedings. Sarah had become something of a symbol to the human colonists, the woman who had spoken for their species during the trial. They matched the profile of Void Wraith raiders. Marcus nodded grimly. The Void Wraiths were one of the Outer Rim's most dangerous threats, a nomadic species that survived by raiding settled worlds and enslaving or killing the inhabitants. They had been preying on frontier colonies for centuries, and their arrival at Haven was probably inevitable. "Signal all defensive units," Marcus ordered. "Execute Plan Omega." Plan Omega was humanity's desperate gamble, a defensive strategy that, relied on the Outer Rim's unique conditions rather than trying to fight a conventional battle. Haven's orbital space was filled with debris from the system's asteroid belt, creating a maze of rocks and metal that made traditional fleet maneuvers impossible. When the Void Wraith fleet entered the system, they found their path blocked by thousands of floating obstacles. The raiders were forced to break formation and navigate carefully through the debris field, giving the human defenders multiple opportunities to strike from concealment. The battle that followed was unlike anything in the history of space warfare. Human ships, smaller and more maneuverable than the Wraith vessels, darted between asteroids like fighters weaving through a forest. They used the debris as cover and weapons, ramming chunks of rock into enemy ships and setting off explosive charges that turned harmless asteroids into deadly projectiles. Elena watched the battle from Haven City's Emergency Command Center, coordinating medical support for wounded fighters while monitoring the progress of the engagement. Each explosion in the sky above represented human lives at risk, but also the future of their entire species. "The Wraith command ship is breaking off," reported one of the military liaisons. "Their fleet is retreating." Elena felt a wave of relief wash over her, followed immediately by the realization that this was only the beginning. The Void Wraiths would be back, probably with reinforcements. And they were just one of the many threats that called the Outer Rim home. But as she looked around the command center at the faces of her fellow colonists, Elena saw something that gave her hope. These were not the same people who had been exiled from civilized space 6 months earlier. They had been tested by the frontier and had emerged stronger, more unified, more determined than ever before. Tom Bradley expressed the same sentiment as he stood in the construction site that would become Haven's expanded spaceport. "The aliens thought they were punishing us by sending us out here," he said to Kate as they watched cargo shuttles bringing supplies from the orbital stations. "They gave us exactly what we needed." "What's that?" Kate asked. Tom smiled, looking out at the red landscape where human determination was carving a new civilization from alien soil, a place where we can become what we were always meant to be. The Outer Rim was harsh and dangerous, filled with threats that would challenge humanity's survival every day. But it was also a place without rules, without limits, without anyone to tell them what they could or could not become. The aliens had cast them out to die in the wilderness. Instead, humanity was learning to make the wilderness their own. Rise of the Rim Empire. 5 years had passed since the last human transport ship crossed into the Outer Rim, and the frontier was no longer the same place. What had once been empty space punctuated by pirate bases and ancient ruins now hummed with human activity. Mining stations pulled wealth from dead asteroids. Research facilities pushed the boundaries of science in ways that civilized space had never allowed. And patrol fleets kept the trade routes safe from the predators that had once ruled this region. President Sarah Chen stood in her office on Haven Prime, looking out at a city that had grown from desperate refugee shelters into gleaming towers that reached toward the orange sky. Sarah had been elected to lead the Outer Rim Coalition 3 years earlier, after Admiral Kane decided that military leadership should give way to civilian government. The transition had been smooth, reflecting the unity that hardship had forged among the human exiles. The reports on Sarah's desk told an extraordinary story of transformation. The human population in the Outer Rim had grown from 12 million refugees to over 30 million citizens as new colonies were established on dozens of worlds. Trade agreements with friendly alien species brought prosperity that rivaled anything in civilized space. Most importantly, human technology had advanced in ways that would have been impossible under the restrictive oversight of the Galactic Council. A soft chime announced the arrival of Sarah's appointment. Ambassador Zahra al-Rashid entered the office with the measured grace of someone who had spent years negotiating with alien species that communicated through everything from chemical emissions to telepathic harmonics. Zahra was in her 40s, with dark hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Madam President," Zahra said, "our deep space monitoring stations have detected something interesting. A Galactic Council diplomatic convoy is approaching the rim boundary under a flag of truce." Sarah felt her eyebrows rise. In 5 years, no Council vessel had entered the Outer Rim except for a few intelligence-gathering missions that had been quietly turned away by human patrol ships. Do we know who's leading the delegation? High Judge Xerion itself, Zara replied, along with representatives from the hegemony, the Zephyrian Empire, and at least 6 other major powers. Sarah leaned back in her chair, processing this information. Xerion was the same crystalline being that had pronounced humanity's exile 5 years earlier. For the Chief Justice of the Galactic Tribunal to make a personal journey to the Outer Rim suggested that something significant was happening in civilized space. What's the situation in Council territory? Sarah asked. Zara activated a holographic display that showed the current political map of the galaxy. Red zones marked areas of active conflict, yellow indicated regions of political instability, and green showed territories under stable government control. There was disturbingly little green on the map. Revolution in the hegemony's outer territories, Zara reported. 17 colony worlds have declared independence, and their military forces can't maintain control. The Zephyrian Empire is facing similar rebellions. Even the core worlds are experiencing civil unrest. Sarah studied the tactical display with growing understanding. The Galactic Council's member species were discovering that ruling a galaxy was much harder than it looked, especially when their subjects were no longer afraid of them. They want our help, Sarah said. Almost certainly, Zara agreed. The question is what we're willing to offer and what we want in return. The Council delegation arrived 2 days later aboard a massive diplomatic vessel that dwarfed even the largest human ships. Sarah met them at Haven Prime's primary spaceport, accompanied by Admiral Kane and a ceremonial honor guard that demonstrated both respect and strength. High Judge Xerion had not changed in the 5 years since the tribunal. Its crystalline body still refracted light into beautiful patterns, and its telepathic voice still carried the weight of ancient authority. But Sarah noticed something different in the way it moved, a hesitancy that suggested uncertainty about this unprecedented visit to the galactic frontier. President Chen, Xerion said as its delegation disembarked, "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting." "High Judge," Sarah replied formally. "Welcome to Haven Prime. I trust your journey was without incident." "The Outer Rim has become much safer than our records suggested," Xerion admitted. "Your patrol ships were most professional in their escort duties." Sarah smiled slightly. Human ships had indeed escorted the Council vessel through the Rim, but it had been as much a demonstration of capability as courtesy. The aliens needed to understand that humanity was no longer the scattered group of refugees they had banished 5 years earlier. The formal negotiations took place in Haven Prime's council chambers, a circular room designed to accommodate the various anatomical requirements of different species. Sarah sat across from Xerion, with Admiral Kane and Ambassador al-Rashid flanking her. The council delegation included not just Xerion, but also General Krath of the Zephyrian Empire and Administrator Vex of the hegemony. The Galactic Council wishes to discuss a revision of humanity's status, Xerion began. Recent developments have demonstrated that human capabilities may have been underestimated. Which capabilities would those be? Sarah asked politely. General Krath leaned forward, its compound eyes reflecting obvious discomfort. This was the same insectoid that had prosecuted humanity's exile, and its presence here represented a complete reversal of its previous position. "Your military effectiveness has exceeded all projections," Krath admitted. "The Void Wraith Confederation has been completely eliminated from this sector. The Syndicate pirates no longer operate within 300 light-years of human space. Even the Devourer swarms avoid this region." Admiral Kane spoke for the first time since the meeting began. "The Outer Rim requires different tactics than civilized space, General. We've adapted our methods accordingly." What Kane did not mention was that human military technology had advanced far beyond anything the Council possessed. Necessity had driven innovation in ways that peacetime never could. Human ships could now travel faster, hit harder, and survive longer than any vessel in the galactic fleet. Administrator Vex, a slug-like being that communicated through color changes in its skin, shifted to patterns that Sarah's translator rendered as urgent concern. The rebellion in our territories grows stronger each day. Traditional peacekeeping methods have proven insufficient. The Council requires assistance from forces experienced in unconventional warfare. Sarah exchanged glances with her advisors. The aliens were essentially admitting that they needed human military intervention to save their own empire from collapse. What exactly are you proposing? Sarah asked. Full restoration of human citizenship and territorial rights, Zerion said. Representation on the Council itself. Access to core world markets and technology exchanges. In return, humanity would provide military support to restore order in troubled regions. The offer was generous, more than anyone could have hoped for 5 years earlier. But Sarah had learned that in politics, the most generous offers often came from the most desperate positions, and if we decline, she asked. Zerion's crystalline form flickered with what Sarah's xenopsychology training identified as uncertainty. The current situation is unsustainable. Without intervention, several member species face complete governmental collapse. That sounds like a you problem rather than an us problem, Admiral Kane observed. The negotiations continued for 3 days, with the Council delegation making increasingly attractive offers, while Sarah's team asked probing questions about the true extent of the crisis in civilized space. Finally, on the 4th day, Sarah called for a private session with just Zerion. The two leaders sat alone in Sarah's office, the crystalline judge casting rainbow patterns across the walls, while the human president reviewed her notes. After 5 years of hardship and growth, Sarah had learned to read alien body language almost as well as human expressions. How long do you have? She asked directly. Zerion's glow dimmed slightly. 6 months, perhaps less. The rebellions are spreading faster than our forces can contain them. Some of our own member species are questioning their loyalty to the Council. Sarah nodded. And you think human military intervention can solve this? Your species has demonstrated remarkable effectiveness at conflict resolution, Zerion replied carefully. Our species was cast out because we were too violent for civilized space, Sarah reminded the judge. Now you want us back because you need that violence to save your civilization. Zerion's form pulsed with what might have been embarrassment. The Council may have made errors in judgment regarding humanity's character. Sarah stood and walked to her window, looking out at Haven Prime's bustling streets where humans and several allied alien species work together in harmony. Hi, Judge. I'm going to decline your offer. The crystalline being's glow flared with surprise. President Chen, please reconsider. The terms are extremely generous. The terms are irrelevant, Sarah replied, turning back to face her visitor. 5 years ago, you decided that humanity was too dangerous to exist in your civilized space. You cast us out into the wilderness, expecting us to weaken and fade away. She gestured toward the window and the thriving city beyond. Instead, we built something stronger than anything in your core worlds. We made alliances that your diplomats never achieved. We solved problems that your best minds couldn't handle. Sarah's voice grew harder. Most importantly, we learned that we don't need you. The Outer Rim is our home now, and we've made it into something that serves our interests rather than yours. Zerion's form dimmed further. What do you want from the Council? Nothing, Sarah said simply. Absolutely, nothing. We'll continue to honor our agreed boundaries. We'll maintain peaceful relations with any species that wants them, but we're not interested in rejoining your galactic community. The crystalline judge sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Finally, it spoke in tones that carried clearly across the room. The Council will not accept this decision. If necessary, we will use force to compel human cooperation. Sarah smiled, and the expression carried no warmth at all. Hi, Judge. I really wouldn't recommend that course of action. 3 months later, a Council enforcement fleet under Admiral Thex of the Vegan hegemony arrived at the rim boundary with clear intentions of forcing human compliance. 200 ships of the line, the most advanced vessels in civilized space, commanded by one of the galaxy's most experienced fleet officers. Admiral Kane met them with a force of 60 human vessels that looked primitive and outmatched by comparison. The Council Admiral opened communications with confidence that bordered on arrogance. Human fleet, you are in violation of Galactic Council directives. Submit to escort back to designated territories immediately. Kane's response was broadcast on every frequency in the system. Admiral Thex, you are in human space without authorization. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. You are outnumbered 3-1, Thex replied. Do not force us to use violence. Kane's smile was visible even across the communication link. Admiral, you have no idea what violence looks like. The battle that followed lasted exactly 47 minutes and changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Human ships moved with speed and precision that the Council forces, could not match. They used weapons that bypassed energy shields and tactics that turned numerical superiority into a fatal disadvantage. When the shooting stopped, 90% of the Council fleet was destroyed or disabled. The remainder fled toward civilized space, carrying news of a defeat that shook the foundations of galactic government. But Admiral Kane was not finished with his demonstration. Human pursuit fleets followed the retreating aliens deep into the Middle Rim, appearing in Council core systems like avenging spirits. No permanent damage was inflicted, but the message was delivered with unmistakable clarity. Humanity could strike anywhere in civilized space whenever they chose. The formal recognition came 6 months later. The Galactic Council officially acknowledged the Outer Rim Human Coalition as a sovereign power with full territorial rights and diplomatic immunity. Trade agreements were signed, embassy exchanges were established, and the galaxy's political structure shifted to accommodate a new major power. President Chen stood on the observation deck of Fortress Prime, the massive space station that served as humanity's military headquarters, watching human patrol fleets move through space that had once been forbidden to her people. Ambassador Al-Rashid joined her, carrying reports from across human space. The latest colony ships departed yesterday, Zara reported. Destination: the Andromeda approach vectors. Our deep space exploration program is ahead of schedule. Sarah nodded, watching the ships disappear into jump space. What's the situation in Council territory? Stabilizing slowly. Our military advisors report good progress in the consultation missions. Several former rebel worlds have requested human mediation services. Sarah smiled at the irony. The species that had been exiled for being too violent was now being hired to keep the peace in civilized space. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the best way to stop a fight was to have the toughest fighter on your side. Any regrets about declining their offer to rejoin the Council? Zara asked. Sarah looked out at the stars that stretched endlessly, in all directions, each one representing possibilities that humanity could now pursue without asking anyone's permission. None whatsoever. They gave us our freedom when they cast us out. I'm not interested in giving it back. The exile had ended, but the Empire had only just begun. 10 years later, the transformation was complete. What had started as a desperate refuge for unwanted exiles had become the most powerful force in the galaxy. The Outer Rim Coalition controlled territory that dwarfed any single Council member, commanded fleets that could appear anywhere in known space within days, and possessed technology that made civilized worlds look primitive by comparison. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now Director of Colonial Development, stood in her laboratory on New Geneva Station, studying readings from humanity's latest discovery. The research team had found something in the deep reaches of the Rim that would revolutionize space travel itself. A natural phenomenon that could transport ships across galactic distances in hours rather than months. The preliminary tests are promising, reported her assistant Dr. James Wright, now an accomplished xenogeologist. If we can harness this energy, we could reach the neighboring galaxies. Elena smiled, remembering the desperate early days when they had struggled just to survive on Haven Prime. James, I think we're about to make the galaxy much smaller. Chief Engineer Tom Bradley, now overseeing construction projects across 40 star systems, received regular reports that would have seemed impossible during the exile years. Human shipyards were producing vessels at a rate that exceeded the entire Council's combined output. Mining operations had located resource deposits that made the Rim the wealthiest region in known space. Most remarkably, human settlements had achieved population growth rates that suggested they would outnumber all council species combined within a generation. The fusion of human determination and Rim resources has created something unprecedented, Tom explained to a group of visiting council observers. We're not just rebuilding civilization out here. We're building something better. Ambassador Zahra al-Rashid had perhaps the most interesting job of all. As humanity's chief diplomat, she found herself mediating disputes between council species that once considered humans beneath their notice. The tables had turned completely. Civilized space now looked to the Outer Rim for leadership, protection, and innovation. The irony is overwhelming, she confided to President Chen during one of their regular briefings. They exiled us because we were too aggressive and unpredictable. Now they can't function without our military protection and economic partnership. Sarah Chen, now serving her third term as president of the coalition, often reflected on the journey that had brought humanity to this point. The scared refugees who had fled through the Rim Gate bearing nothing but determination and anger had become the galaxy's dominant civilization in just 1 decade. The aliens thought they were solving a problem when they cast us out, she told the annual Colonial Assembly. They had no idea they were creating their future leaders. The assembled representatives from dozens of human worlds and allied species applauded, but Sarah's mind was already focused on the next challenge. Deep space exploration teams had detected signals from beyond the galactic edge, evidence of civilizations that existed in the vast emptiness between galaxies. Soon humanity would need to decide whether to make contact with powers that might dwarf even their own capabilities. Admiral Kane, now Fleet Admiral of all human military forces, supervised exercises that involved more ships than the entire Council Navy possessed. The crews were no longer desperate exiles fighting for survival. They were confident professionals who had never known defeat. They patrolled space that stretched from the galactic core to the outer edge, ensuring that no threat could approach human territory undetected. Sir, the deep space monitoring stations are reporting something unusual, his aide reported during one routine briefing. Long-range sensors have detected massive energy signatures from the direction of the Andromeda Galaxy. Kane studied the readings with interest rather than concern. Whatever was out there, humanity would meet it with the same determination that had carried them through exile and transformation. They had learned to turn every challenge into an opportunity, every threat into a stepping stone toward greater strength. The galaxy that had once considered humans too dangerous for civilized society now depended on them for its very survival, and in the vast darkness beyond the galactic rim, humanity was preparing to reach even further, to explore possibilities that no one had ever imagined. The species that had been cast out to die in the wilderness had instead conquered that wilderness and made it the foundation of an empire that spanned the stars. The exile had ended, but the empire had only just begun its expansion into infinity itself.